here's a story I'd like to share. I was born and raised in Saginaw, Michigan. Born in 75, came up essentially in the 80s and 90s. All that media, that was all new media. We never had that stuff before. We never had the music that came to be what is still today, I guess. But between the music and the TV shows and movies, these are the things that shaped us, formed us, within the realm of my friends and the circle there. And in 1986, I would have been 11 years old. And about that time, 1986, maybe even back to 1983, but definitely in 1986, it took its biggest hit. Crack cocaine was introduced to my city. And most of our fathers worked for General Motors. That was the foundry, the factory work, that most of our fathers in my neighborhood, they worked there. And when the crack cocaine came in 86, about that same time, General Motors decided to start sending most of its labor overseas. And that greatly depreciated my neighborhood. And a lot of fathers stepped out. A lot of fathers went their own ways, I guess. Maybe tried to make it better for people, for their family somewhere else, because they lost that income that income from their labor. Regardless, the kids in the neighborhood started watching their fathers. You know how they say the sins of the father. So a lot of us were watching our fathers and replicating what they were doing. And at the time, a lot of fathers turned to alcohol and drugs and crime because there was no other source of income to support their families, maybe. But how that played out was because a lot of us kids were watching our fathers and just watching the neighborhood in general, adults. And gangs came rolling into the neighborhoods, really violent gangs. It was the first time, really that gangs had started to use guns to hurt people. And I got caught up in the rap there. I got caught up running the streets, and I never really played too many favors one over the other. I had friends in both gangs, in two of the most prominent gangs. If you're interested in the gangs there, exactly how it rolled out, if you Google Saginaw, Michigan, 1990 to 1997 gang activity, you'll see it all unwind there. There's a really good write-up on it. Tragic stories would make for a fascinating movie, I think. But a lot of kids turn to gangs, and I myself turned to gangs because they helped me out through a lot of situations that I had been bullied for many years, pushed to my limit, joined a gang. Just like you see in the movies, it's pretty much based off real life. So I did that. I joined up with the gang, one more prominent, a little bit more prominent than the other, and we got caught up in some illegal activity. And I don't really want to say what it was, but I was looking at 30 years to life in prison. I was 17 years old. I was trying to get out of Saginaw, so I had already enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. I was trying my hardest to get out of Saginaw because I was watching a lot of my friends and friends of friends die, get shot, become disabled. I was just seeing terrible things happening that I was living with my parents at the time, and I took it home with me, as one would say. And whole bunch of crazy scenarios went down, but in the end, a lot of my friends died, and a lot of my friends went to prison for many years. Not just because of my incident. It's not my incident, just an incident that I was involved in. But I was looking at 30 years to life in prison, and strangely at the time it didn't bother me. It didn't impact me as hard, because I knew on the streets my life was coming short. If I didn't get off those streets, my life was coming really short. And that was not something that you want to have nor take home to your parents' house when they're trying to provide an ideal setting. I came from good parents. Unfortunately, my dad learned a lot of the patterns that he was involved in, that I was involved in watching him. You know, he was a gangbanger when he was in high school because racism was extreme, and you had to have a group of guys that you could depend on. And then he actually ended up dropping out of high school at the age of 17 to join the Marine Corps and go to Vietnam, where he knew he'd fight in battle. And he did that because he said that Saginaw was death for him. There was nothing in Saginaw but his end. He would rather go fight a war in the jungle than continue down the path that he was on. And same way with me, I guess. You know, when my troubles caught up with me, I would do anything to get out of that situation. But I was already enlisted in the Marine Corps because Saginaw was just closing in on me. So I went off to the Marines, and I got, for the really first time in my life, to see outside of my little circle that I had in Saginaw. And I got to see the rest of the world. I got to meet great people. I got to hang out with millionaires and super poor people. And I still do that today. But because of the people that I seen and what I experienced, I knew that I had to have more than I was given. I knew that I had to make better choices, and should I bring a family into this world, make better choices for my son and or daughter at the time, I was thinking. And I would also ask people, you know, I still have no problem with, if I see a guy in like a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, you know, I'm going to walk, especially if he's young, I'm going to walk up to him, introduce myself and say, hey, how is it that you came to be what you are? And then I'd hear their stories and hear how they suffered at times too. And some were silver spoon children, you know, somebody else bought the car for them, but I learned that I could do way better because I've seen other people do better after failure. And so when I returned to Saginaw after the Marines, I was determined to go to college and get a degree. Nobody had ever talked to me about these things, but I knew that to become something other than what I had in store for me, what life had in store for me, I had to have a degree. I didn't have to have a degree for the paperwork, but I had to have the degree for my mind, for my brain, to say I'm doing something positive with myself. I'm going to be better. And that started to reinforce that good self-talk, and I encouraged myself along the way. Had a lot of other encouragement too from my mom and other family, but I just knew I had to do better than what I had done. I was grateful for my life, am grateful for my life, but at the time I had done my time in the Marines, got out, and people that I knew were still in prison from things that I had been involved with one way or another. And I just really started to see how lucky I was, how God was with me all that time and saved me, because he had bigger and better plans for me than death or prison. And, you know, in some cases another 10 years went by before I ended up bumping into people that I knew from high school, because they had gotten locked up for like 15 years. So I really started to invest in me at that time. That's the story. The story is, if I can do it, anybody can do it, for real. I've had high highs and low lows and everywhere in between. And I wanted to share this message to encourage others, especially kids on the inner city, kids in the rural areas that don't have resources available, living the tough life. You want to make one decision, but you don't. You want to make another. Do the better thing, because there is such a more positive life out there for you, for all of us. If we could all just quit wanting more and more and more and more. You know, once we get something, we not only do we want more, we want a bigger engine, a faster, a lighter, a smaller, a slimmer, a faster, you know, more speeds. We just want more and more and more, and we can't stop that drive, you know. This whole economy nowadays it feels like Christmas morning when you get a whole bunch of gifts that you don't want, and you just keep buying and scrolling. You gotta escape that environment. I'm fortunate that I was not brought up in that environment. Cell phones didn't exist yet. Wi-Fi didn't exist. The internet didn't exist. You know, a real computer outside of, I think it's called DOS prompt or something, you know, zeros and ones, ones and zeros. None of that even existed when I was growing up. We had to go outside and make contact with the world in order to achieve bigger or better. And you still got to do that now. This is definitely not the platform for it, but I encourage all young men and women to join the military. Start to do better. You know there's better out there. You've seen the internet, and you can have it too. We can all have a piece of better. But what happens when you get a piece of better is you got to be content with that and take care of that better and nourish it and not try and outdo it. Use what you got and be very proficient with it. Be very proficient with what you have, and it becomes a desirable skill. You know, whether it's taking an engine apart and fixing it instead of buying a new one, growing plants. It's funny because when I grew up, if we in my circle would have known somebody, like a kid that was our age that was home growing plants, other than the one that some people were, you know, growing a real garden, you'd laugh at them and you'd call them names and put them down, or you wouldn't want to hang out with them because that's not what we were about. We were about other things, just having fun and being crazy. But look at, you know, how stupid was that? Because these kids who know how to grow plants and stuff, that's your life source. That's your life source. But I didn't think about it as my life source back then. You know, I took the world for granted, took every day for granted, never gave thanks to God, believed in Jesus, just happenstance. Came from the family that I grew up in, definitely not strong believers. Definitely never talk about it, to the point that we go to church once in a while, but mainly Easter and Christmas, but you don't talk about religion, you don't talk about God, you don't ask questions. We didn't even have, like my parents, they didn't even have the ability to look things up. You had to go to the library if you were lucky enough to have one in your neighborhood. When you come up in a rough neighborhood, you don't have a library, or that's where all the homies are hanging out at, so you don't really want to be up at the library. Nowadays you got the internet, anything and everything. You can pick it up right now, learn it for free right now, try different things, be a better person. You're not going to find out what you like until you try a little bit of everything. A little bit of everything. And my message to the world and to the youth is, stop trying to be cool. Stop trying to act like you got it all. Stop not caring. Bring back caring. I grew up in a time, even though the streets were riddled with gangs and stuff, people still cared. Your neighbors still cared. You knew who everybody on your block was just about. And on my block, you know, the streets were tough. They were. I took many a beatings. So I think I had like eight fist fights by the time I was in the 12th grade. And I was never the instigator. I was always the pincushion. But that's how kids were acting out. They were violent. The music was violent. You know, that's exactly when NWA and Tupac and Eazy-E and all these, it went from Dougie Fresh and I want to say Run MDC, but that's not right. I can't remember the name of the group. It's been 30 years. Run something. Fat Boys, Dougie Fresh. It was clean. It was fun. And then they turned the music to gangster music. And they turned the rock and roll to heavy metal. And all these words were full of rage and full of anger. And it was all psyop. None of those people even knew what they were doing or talking about. They were from the street. So there's a better life out there for us all. We just gotta try better. Peace.